What's up everyone? If this is your first time here on my channel, my name is Lance Hedrick. I've been a coffee professional for around a decade, and this year I actually coached the United States Barista Champion, Morgan Eckroth. You may know her from TikTok or from YouTube or other places. Anyway, I wanted to share with you today some of the tips that I shared with her in order to really get them ready for that Barista Championship, which we took home, and we'll be going to the World Championships in September, so stay tuned. So essentially, whenever I'm training people, including Morgan when we were dialing in coffees, I suggest three major tips. The first one is to know and understand roast level and how it relates to your ratio. The second is to get in what I call the zone before you're making minor changes to your espresso. The last one is to make sure that your putt preparation is consistent and repeatable. So let's break those three down really quickly, and hopefully you'll be making better espresso by the end of this video. So that first tip is to know your roast level as it relates to your ratio. Now, very often people think in terms of light and dark being directly related to taste profile. And so then this idea gets conflated to where if a coffee tastes really bright and acidic, they immediately think it's light, even if it doesn't look very light. And the same goes with dark roast. If a coffee tastes chocolatey and it tastes a little bitter, they think, oh, this is dark, so I have to make sure it aligns with dark roasts. But let me tell you, that is not necessarily the case. Whenever you're dialing in coffees, don't take into account the flavor profile. Actually, what you should take into account is the roast level first and foremost. With lighter roasted coffees, they're more difficult to extract, less soluble. You want to push your extraction with variables of extraction that we can control, which include, the biggest one is yield. The biggest way you can affect extraction in espresso is the amount of espresso you pull out. So going from a 1-to-2 ratio, maybe to a 1-to-2.5 or a 1-to-3. Now for those of you watching that may be unfamiliar with those terms, I'm referring to 1 gram of coffee to 3 grams of water. That would be a 1-to-3 ratio, or not water, I'm sorry, excuse me. 1 gram of coffee to 3 grams of espresso in your cup. That would be a 1-to-3 ratio. Same with 1-to-2, 1 gram of coffee to 2 grams of espresso. So the more espresso we extract, the more the yield is, the more your extraction yield is going to be. So with lighter roasted coffees, you really need to push that extraction in order to have a yummy coffee. Now for darker roasted coffees, they tend to be more soluble. And when taking that into account, you need to think about the fact that if you push it really far like you would a light roast, it might taste really gross. So in Morgan's instance, our coffee was very bright. It was like incredibly bright. And if we pulled it though, in a similar way to a lightly roasted coffee, so a 1-to-3 or a 1-to-4 ratio, we were gonna get a really watery, really bitter, really gross coffee, because the competition coffee we used was actually roasted pretty developed. And the reason is because inherently that coffee was super acidic, and because of the intense fermentation process, was really soluble. So we actually counterintuitively took this bright modern coffee and we used a smaller ratio. So that seems counterintuitive because when you think about modern coffees, you think about pushing extraction. But in reality, you have to think about not only the roast level, but also the processing. So the more intensely processed a coffee is, the more soluble, the smaller ratio you want to use. So one of my first tip is to think about ratios first and foremost. Ratios are going to affect extraction more than anything else, more than temperature, more than, honestly, more than grind size, more than all these other things. Your ratio is a huge thing. Now, I know you're hearing me say grind size, and that's gonna lead us to the next one, because you're thinking, okay, well, what if I go super coarse and I still pull a 1-to-5 and it runs in 8 seconds? Am I gonna have a high extraction? Well, maybe not. And the reason is because you're not in what I call the zone. So when I say the zone, I like to tell people to start by dialing in a coffee to where it's running around a 1-to-2 ratio in about 25 seconds. Once you're in that zone, then your minor movements are going to keep you within an area that makes sense. Now, that's super vague, and I meant for it to be vague because the zone is a vague area. Some beans, the zone is huge. For some beans, it's really narrow. And so what we're trying to do is we're finding this zone so that our movements are intuitive and they make sense to how coffee extracts. If we're outside the zone, then those movements don't make any sense. So if you get your espresso machine, you just got your first espresso machine, you're so excited. You grind your coffee, you tamp it, you pull it, and it gushes out in like 8 seconds. And you're like, okay, I need to make a minor movement in order to make it slower. And so you make a minor movement, and it's still gushing. You make another movement, it's still gushing. These minor movements are not going to help you very much when you're having these big 8-second gushers. You have to get You have to make big movements in order to get into a position where you have a small window. Because if you're thinking about the fact that coffee extracts sours, sweets, bitters, as I talk about in my parts 1 and 2 of my espresso extraction videos, which I'll post here, the much longer form, then you're going to think that, oh wow, this is sour, it's under extracted, I need to increase extraction. But sometimes, whenever you over extract, it tastes really watery. So if you have a 15-second extraction, it's really watery, you may think to yourself, oh, it's over extracted because it's watery. That idea of sour, sweet, bitter does not matter until we're in that zone, okay? So don't even think about it. Don't even think about it until we're in the zone. So the zone is that time, is kind of around 25 to 30 second shot where it's slow enough that it takes that long in order to give you a 1:2 or a 1 to 2.5 ratio. All right, so that's my second tip, is to ensure that we hit that zone. So the same thing happened in our competition. The first thing we did when Morgan was dialing in that coffee was we find that zone whenever we had to use a new grinder, and then we make adjustments from that zone. And then the final tip, for new baristas and advanced baristas alike, whenever using a 9-bar machine, which these tips are all kind of catered towards, the final recommendation is to really ensure you have consistent puck preparation. Now, of course, I'm very opinionated on what is the best puck preparation. I personally think it's the WDT, Weiss distribution technique, which looks like this. You take your portafilter, you put sort of a funnel on it, you take small acupuncture needles. Now, it's very important that you're using 0.4 millimeters or below, down to about 0.3, in order to affect a really good distribution here. And now I've posted past videos, I'll link one right here, where I have papers linked to it that are kind of showing this with objective data, that this is a more consistent and higher extracting type of puck preparation. But that's not what I'm going over right now. What I'm getting at is you want to have as much consistency in your preparation as possible. So Morgan in the Barista Championship felt comfortable using a leveler tool. I don't like leveler tools. I think they give you less even extraction. But if you're going to use it, you need to use it the same exact way every single time. So what I had Morgan doing was ensuring that the bed was the same levelness, the same evenness with each of her portafilters before using that OCD, and then tamping with the same exact pressure on each one. We used a calibrated tamper that hit the same pressure on each puck. So it's very important when you're trying to make changes, you're trying to dial in your espresso, to have this type of control over your puck preparation. So now I'm going to take those ideas, I'm going to quickly dial in this coffee, and we're going to call it a day. So today I'm using a really lightly roasted coffee. It's a washed Ethiopia from my friends at Regalia. Paolo does a fantastic job roasting. So this is really, really lightly roasted coffee. So I'm going to grind it quite finely, and what I'm going to do is use a 1:3 ratio. And what I'm going to do is, off camera, I'm going to dial it so I get into that zone, and then we're going to taste it. Then I'll talk about what changes I might make, but I'm going to make sure that my first pull, I want it to be a 1:3 ratio because of how light it is, and I want that to come out in about 30 seconds. So I'm going to hit that zone. I'm going to do it based off my grind, the roast level, and then we're going to talk about how I do my preparation, which is so I can have more consistency from shot to shot, so that as I'm dialing in, it actually makes sense, the changes that I'm making. Because if we don't have consistency, the changes don't really make sense. All right, so I dialed it in. I got it to where it was 20 grams in, 60 grams out in 30 seconds. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a stir and I'm going to give it a taste. That may seem like a huge shot, but again, this is a really lightly roasted Ethiopia coffee, so I like to get that zone of 1 to 3. And with this, I know that for my taste preferences, that's roughly where I'm going to like it. And so from here, I can make tweaks on maybe I want a little less out, maybe a little more out based off of extraction. Maybe I want to go a little finer to slow it down or a little coarser to speed it up. But this is the zone I'm talking about. I also I made sure that I was very careful in my puck preparation to do something that was repeatable. So I do my typical WDT, doing circles from the bottom all the way to the top, one slight tap, and then tamp as evenly as possible. And again, I had that video linked on how I do WDT. But whatever you're doing, just make sure it is consistent, okay? So now we're gonna give it a little stir. All right, calm that down. We gotta make Daddy Hoff proud. All right, nice. We're gonna take a sippy sip. Super floral on the nose. Gotta love it. Lots of citrus, a little stone fruit. Wow, vibrant. Oh my goodness. It's actually fantastic. I don't know if I'd even want to make a change of this. Yeah. Oh my. That's like raining peaches and nectarines and mandarin oranges. That's a very good coffee. I don't even know what their taste notes are. Lavender, bergamot, and jasmine. They have like all florals on there. Definitely get bergamot and maybe some lavender, but a lot of it's in that citrusy, that citrus area. Lots of bergamot, florals, orange blossom. It's very good. If I were to make any changes, there is just a smidge of astringency on the end. So what I might do is I might coarsen it just a bit to let it run a little faster, a little less contact time. Or I could stop the shot a little earlier, but I would prefer to have the higher extraction, just a little less contact time, because yield, again, is going to be the biggest factor when it comes to extraction yield. Anyway, I hope that relaying what I did with Morgan to you all helps you in dialing in your coffees at home. If you're new to the channel, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button so that you can see more of the content that I do. You know, if you liked the video, hit that like, leave a comment below. I would love to get to know some of you new subscribers and anybody who's seen this video that hasn't been around. Thank you so much. I do have a Patreon if you want to check that out. It allows me to do these videos, helps pay for production, helps pay for the equipment I use. But in any event, I hope you brew something tasty, whether you're using these tips or not. And cheers.